everybody, welcome back to Z-Pod. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Sarah. For those of you who don't know, if you haven't listened to my podcast before, I'm so glad you're here. I'd love for you to check out last week's podcast. I speak with one of my friends from Armidale who's struggled with anxiety, and she shares on her experience and some ways that she's overcome it, and she's just an awesome chick. So if you want to go check that out, that would be awesome. But today I thought I'd really love to just sit down with you guys, just me, get a little bit personal, get a little bit real talk, and I want to talk about my struggle with depression. So when I was a younger teenager, I had depression. I was actually on medication for a little while for that depression, and it was pretty rough, to be honest. I was really confused for a long time because to me, when people are on medication, it's because there's something seriously wrong with them. And because my situation, I guess, felt like it was very emotional, it didn't really make sense for me to have to be on this medication, and so I was really conflicted all the time. So I thought today I might talk to you about my experience was, what I felt helped me, what maybe wasn't very helpful for me. And maybe you're someone who's struggling with that yourself, and if you are, I hope this kind of opens up the discussion for you as well. Maybe you don't even know if it's what you're struggling with and you're just working out what's going on with you. You're feeling some differences, you're feeling like something's up. And if that's you, then please keep listening. I'd love to chat with you, and if it's something you relate with, please reach out. If you have any questions, feel free to comment on the YouTube. This is going to be on YouTube as well as Podbean. Just before I get into that, I just want to say a huge thank you to those of you who have already been listening and really following what I'm doing. I appreciate you guys so much. You have no idea how much it means to me to have all your feedback and hear you guys telling me that you love it, and that, even offering up suggestions of topics. I've had a few of you mention stuff that you'd like me to talk about, and that means the absolute world to me. So thank you so much. And those of you who've just started listening, my whole concept for this podcast is just to be a family. I just want to be like a big sister to you, especially teenagers, obviously, because I know like sometimes life can be really tricky. Sometimes it can be really complicated, and if you're new, please stick around. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. But yeah, so depression. When I was probably around 14, I think, was kind of when it all started. I remember I started to kind of lose motivation for anything really when it came to hanging out with friends, or even just replying to a text message. I had no, motivation to engage at all with anyone. And so I started to kind of disconnect completely from the world, and I think my parents noticed pretty early on, and they were pretty worried about me, but I was pretty in denial. I didn't want to admit that anything was wrong because, no one wants to think that they're crazy or that there's something wrong with them. And so I probably put it off for a long time before I actually realized that I needed to reach out. It actually wasn't me who realized I needed to reach out. It was because I found myself in a really dark place. I got to a place where, ending my life became really real for me. It became, in my head, an understandable option, became something that felt right, because I just felt so empty. I felt so meaningless, really. I started to lose all passion for anything in my life, and things were complicated at home. Things were complicated at school, and I just felt like, there was no purpose for me anywhere, which was a complete lie. But at the time, it's really hard to know, especially when you're feeling in the thick of it, and everyone's trying to tell you that everything's going to be fine. But when you're in the middle of it, it's so hard to let that message come through, all that pain and all those barriers that you've put up because of that pain that you're feeling. It's hard to let all that hope that people are trying to plant in you come through, because you just got all your defenses up. I totally understand that. That's completely where I was at. And so I really struggled by myself for a long time, until my mum actually found out how deep and dark of a place I was in. And so she asked me to speak to her friend who was a counselor. She was really good at kind of coming down to my level and not trying to make me feel like I was a patient or I was a crazy person, but purely just speaking to me from the angle of she cared about me and wanted to see where I was at. And I opened up to her. She made me feel like I could trust her, and so I told her stuff that I hadn't really told anyone yet about, making attempts to take my life. And failing and being really confused and angry about all of that. And so I spoke to her and I shared how I was feeling, and she kind of expressed that she was concerned about me and concerned about the place I was in, and asked me if I felt like I was a danger to myself. And I was completely honest with her and said, I don't even know who I am right now. I don't think I even trust myself right now. So I probably am a danger to myself. And so she kindly and gently, but pretty assertively, offered the idea to take me to the hospital. She didn't feel like it was a good idea to just take me home. So she took me to the hospital, and I had my little experience of being in a room with padded everything, and that was pretty scary and pretty real. And so for the next couple of years, I kind of went on and off medication and dealt with that. But I think one of the biggest things that made an impact for me was when my mum, actually, I remember she put a little sticker of a black dog on my drawers next to my bed. And I remember she told me I need to look at my depression like it's a little black dog on a leash. And I'll never forget that to this day, because to me, it really showed me that my depression wasn't something that I needed to let run my life. Because up until then, it definitely had been. Probably because I didn't have a label for it yet. I didn't understand what it was. It was just what I was feeling. I was in the thick of it. I felt completely lost of interest in anything. I had no appetite. I had no energy. My concentration was all over the place. At school, I felt like I was speaking a different language to everyone else. My sleep, I was barely sleeping at all, and my self-esteem was terrible. I completely had no love for myself at all. And so, it started to really consume my whole life. And then as soon as this concept of that depression, which is what it was in my life, being like a little black dog that I was the boss of, made a really big impact, because I needed to understand that if I wanted to and I was really determined, I could start to take a rein on it and start to pull the lead when I needed to, and pick up when I was in a situation that was feeding my depression, when I was in a environment that was making my depression even more obvious, if you know what I mean. So being around people who were negative and being around people who just spoke about horrible stuff that was going on in their life and never spoke hope or life in any situation, those were the situations that would almost amplify my depression. Whereas if I went out and I found people who were positive, or people who were even just speaking life in any way, whether it was just through fun and joy and humor, or in church, or whatever it was, when I surrounded myself with those people, it was like I started to take control of that depression. And it's not to say that it completely went away. I still struggled with it a lot, especially at nighttime. Nighttime was the worst for me, because I would just be lying in bed thinking about it. But that's when music became a really big part of my life. I started to take a rein on creating an atmosphere in my head and feeding myself in my mind and my heart stuff that was going to be positive and uplifting, even in those really vulnerable times, like when you're lying in bed at night and thinking about everything that's happened that day. And so, I just started to create little habits through my life that was pulling the lead on all of those things that were making life hard for me, and, really treating it like it was that little black dog in my life. And so I really believe that those little tiny strategies that I was using made a huge difference in the rest of my life, because now, as a 25-year-old woman, I do believe that I wouldn't say that I have depression anymore. I definitely have times where I feel down and I feel sad, but I believe that I'm free from depression, and I'm free from those terrible, down, horrible, deep darkness feelings that I used to have. Personally, I believe God played a huge part in that, but I also believe that creating positive habits of controlling my mind space and controlling what was going into my heart and into my mind through music and the people I was hanging out with, I really think that's how I got out of it. And not everyone gets out of it. Some people have to learn to live with it, and that's really tough. For those of you who are in the middle of that right now, just know, I'm here for you. I understand that feeling of being in that deep, dark place, and you're never alone. So I just really, in this podcast, wanted to reach out to you guys and chat to you about this. in a really real and vulnerable way. It's not easy for me to talk about this so in depth, especially about the wanting to end my life side of things. That feels really raw for me. But I wanted to talk about it because I know a lot of young people are going through this, and I know a lot of young people, you guys are struggling with these feelings, and you don't know what the label is. You don't know what it is even called. You don't know if it's depression or just being in a sucky situation. And so I want to encourage you guys, go and find someone you can talk to, even if it's just reaching out to me in the comments right now. I would really love to know that you've at least found some sort of outlet where you can reach out. I really love the organization Headspace. I think they're incredible. They've helped a lot of people in my family and a few of my friends as well. So if it's at a point where you're really feeling a serious deep darkness, please, please, please reach out. You are not alone. You don't have to do this by yourself at all, ever. You're never alone. You're always worth someone's time. Thank you so much for listening to Z-Pod this week. I hope it's been encouraging for you. I hope it's been life-giving in some way. I really care about you guys, and I hope that you feel a part of the family because, this is a safe place for you. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next week. Woo!